Hi, today I'd just like to share how to keep your watercolor paper wet longer. A lot of my students ask me, how do you keep the paper wet so long? And it's very essential in watercolor to avoid the overworked look and to just create the beautiful, fresh watercolor washes that make watercolor so beautiful. It's just essential to have enough water. It is watercolor after all. Um, So I'd just like to share with you a few key points that I've learned that can help keep your paper wet longer and that will give you more time to work and allow you to not be rushed as you're painting quite as much. So, first of all, I'd like to talk about paper. It's really important to have 100% cotton paper with watercolor. There is watercolor paper that is not 100% cotton, and they use wood pulp in the paper. So it's tempting, especially as a student, to not want to spend the money to invest in watercolor paper that's really good because it is expensive, and so yeah, I get that. But the students that occasionally come to class with really cheap paper actually make it a lot harder on themselves. And so I'd like to show you like the difference in the papers here. Like this here, I mean, you may not can really see the difference until you paint, but this is a very cheap watercolor paper, and it's, if you could feel it, it's just very smooth. Honestly, it almost has like a plasticky feel, and that's because it has wood pulp in it. It's not 100% cotton. So, these papers here are just beautiful paper, 100% cotton, um, arches and twin rocker handmade paper. And I love these papers. So, if anything is worth investing in with supplies, I always say that the paper is the most important. So, yeah, the paper with wood pulp in it, you know, it's actually not acid free, even if they say that it is. But they use chemicals to treat it to get rid of the acid from the wood. But years later, those chemicals wear off. But yeah, so the cotton paper, it's like, cotton is like a rag, it's like a sponge, it's really absorbent. And so wood pulp just makes it slick and not very absorbent. So yeah, that's a huge a huge one to me. So yeah, the next thing, some artists that I love, they wet the back of their paper before they start painting. And oftentimes they will wet the back of their paper and then they'll stick their paper down while it's wet onto a hard board, like a acrylic glass board that's water resistant, waterproof. And so when they do that, it adheres to the slick hard surface and almost like suctions to it, and it stays wet a long time because the back of the paper can't really breathe. So it helps encourage the front of the paper to hold its water better. Um, yeah, so I know some really amazing artists that do that. I don't really personally do that myself, but I think that they have a good technique. So it's worth experimenting with. Yeah, another tip is Gall Medium. You can buy that from a lot of pigment manufacturers. It's just a blending agent, gives you more time to work because it prevents the water from evaporating as fast. It helps the paint to blend in a little easier, and I just haven't found the need for that, but some people use that, and it's like made from cow kidneys, I believe. So yeah, you can try that out. But so for me, like the next thing I'd like to share would probably be the top thing besides the 100% cotton paper, and that would be wetting your paper basically 2 or 3 times. Um, so yeah, I'd like to just show you. So when you have a painting that you're working on and you have these big washes, like especially if it's a larger painting, like this is pretty small, but still, it's good to give yourself as much working time as you can. So, like with these big wet and to wet areas, and when you need a lot of time because you need to come in here and do all this negative painting detail, you know, it takes time to do those details. So, the more time you can give yourself, the better. So, I like to wet the paper 2 or 3 times when I'm painting areas like that where I need a lot of time. So I'll just show you real quick here what I'm talking about, like wetting 2 or 3 times. So for example, if you're going to start a wash and you wet your paper, that's pretty dry. Basically, the paper is like a sponge, and it's thirsty to start with because it's bone dry, um, and it's a rag. So basically, it needs to be saturated with with water. So when you first put water down, like I just did, it's gonna pull that water in pretty quickly. It needs to quench its thirst. Yeah, so it takes a couple minutes for that water to start to really absorb into that rag paper. Um, so right now on this first wash of water, we have evaporation happening of the water, but we're also having the paper pulling and sucking the water into the inside of the paper. So it takes a few minutes for that water to really saturate into the paper. So once it does that, it dries the paper out somewhat, so it becomes kind of like just a very dry dampness. So then I like to take my water, come back, and add even more water to it. So that's the second time of wetting. And that's probably pretty good right there. But if you want like extra time to work even more, then you could go back with in a few minutes, let this kind of absorb a little bit, and then come back with a third time and re-wet it. And what it's doing is it's just completely saturating the inside of the paper, and so that the paper's not thirsty anymore. And that, honestly, like I've seen when you do that, it it can give you like twice the amount of working time as if than if you just go directly onto dry paper and start painting. So that is a huge point to me, is to wet the paper 2 or 3 times if you need it. Some washes are more like smaller, tighter details, and you don't need the paper so wet like that. But that's more for wet into wet kind of work. So yeah, I'd like the next point would be a humidifier. Some people, if they're in a very dry climate, find that a humidifier can actually help a little bit. Having a humidifier in the room you're painting in and keep it going. Um, and you can use like a mister. You can get a cosmetic hairstyling mister that just gives like a very fine mist that can help. But so yeah, one more tip I'd like to give is matching the brush's wetness to the paper. Yeah, I believe that this can play a role because sometimes when student asks that why is your paper staying wet longer, sometimes it's honestly like I'm not sure because they're using just as much water to start with, but maybe they're not wetting it 2 to 3 times. And then sometimes what I think happens is that their brush is too dry as they're painting. So like if I show you here, if you're painting and your paper is a pretty glossy wetness like this, if your brush is drier than your paper, like I'm gonna show you here, my brush is a little bit too dry. So when I come in, it's actually pulling water off the paper. So you can add a little bit of water to your brush, and then when you come back in, it's not pulling water off the paper. So it is important to know though that you don't want to go too much wetter than the paper if you have color done like this right here. Because if you have color done, that can create a bloom if your brush is too wet. But just matching the brush wetness to the paper's wetness to where it's an even balance can avoid drying the paper out faster than necessary. Yeah, so thank you for listening, and I hope that's helpful. Please, if you have any other thoughts or ideas that you've heard about keeping your paper wet longer, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Yeah, I hope you can join me sometime to paint in my illuminating watercolor class community. So I hope to see you soon.